I've spent the better part of 3 years saying the same exact thing about content strategy over and over and over again. More is not a strategy. And I will stand by that statement in the right context. But I'm starting to rethink things just a little bit. Don't tell my coworkers, but I think more might actually be a strategy. Let's talk about when, why, and how. You're listening to the Content Head Podcast with me, Joe Michalowski. Every week I dive into one big idea that's come up in my day-to-day while leading content in B2B SaaS. Listen in for lessons and rants about working through the challenges of being a lean content team in the do more with less environment we all find ourselves in. Thanks for joining me to nerd out about content. Let's get into it. Okay, I need to be a little careful with this topic because the last thing I want is for anyone to come out of this with the main takeaway of being like, see, quantity is better than quality. Joe said so. The debate is over. This is not a quantity versus quality debate. That is a tired, old debate that the content marketing community has had for years, and I don't feel like getting into it. I don't think it's worth it. So I want to give a little context to actually set the stage for what we're talking about. And this all goes back to when I created content for Mosaic. And starting in October 2020, I was hired as an agency worker, working directly with the two co-founders. There was no marketing team. And at the time, the site was brand new. And honestly, the space was brand new, at least for our ICP. This was not something where we were going up against like a Salesforce or a HubSpot in the CRM space. We are creating content for a startup finance audience and marketing a product that largely just didn't exist before. And so by May 2021, so about 6 months later, I was hired away from my agency to be the third marketer at Mosaic. There was a product marketer, there was a demand gen person, and I was the content person, all working under our co-founder. And I was thrown right into the thick of like the classic startup mindset of more. No matter what the results are, the business wants more out of you, more out of everybody. You're looking for hockey stick high growth. And so how do we just keep pouring fuel on the fire? And so I think the three of us handled it pretty well and set a really high quality bar for ourselves. We wanted to create things and market things that were of a level that we thought our audience would really resonate with. And so even still, with that sort of quality bar, there was no getting around our boss's constant refrain of like, that's great, but how can we do more? Oh, you're publishing 4 articles a month? How do we do 8? You published 1 ebook this quarter? How do we publish 2 ebooks next quarter? Somebody said that webinars are working well for them. How do we do webinars? We aren't doing any right now. We need to start a podcast. And so on and on and on. And that is where my more is not a strategy refrain came from, mostly to protect myself and the team from just cranking out things that were just being cranked out for the sake of doing them. But honestly, it pushed us to do everything for a reason. Like we believed that, yes, we had to do more. And we're doing more to say that we're doing more, mostly to satisfy our boss. But we really had to sit down and explain, like, okay, like we have to do webinars, but we're not just going to do webinars to say we're doing webinars. How do we do them in a way that our audience will really care about them? And so we continued to set that high bar for ourselves. And this like is a common startup mindset that flies in the face of anything a content marketer would tell you right now. And so everybody right now is saying, don't create more just for the sake of creating more. Spend more time repurposing and less time creating new content. You don't have to be everywhere. Just be really good at a couple of channels. And so I talked about this a little bit already in an episode back called like Everything Works, Now What? And so basically that episode was about narrowing down all the possibilities. I truly believe that whether you decide to do webinars or a podcast or blog posts or SEO or social media, like all of these things work. Like we're not reinventing the wheel of marketing with every new content strategy. So it's really about narrowing down like all of these things that could work into what you can and want to commit to. And so all of that in an effort to say like, we shouldn't just be doing more as a strategy. It's not a good strategy. But now that I'm kind of rethinking that, I think the caveat I want to mention is that time and time again, I was sort of proven wrong. We would get feedback like, oh, wow, you guys are everywhere. Like I keep seeing you, or you guys just have so much helpful content. Like, thank you. Or every time I look something up, you guys are there in the results. And every time we heard somebody say that, it was like a little bit of like a plus one to this idea that we should just be creating more. And that was where, the push kept coming from to do more and more projects. So I think the caveat here is that like more, it's not a strategy by itself, but it is important to your strategy. One, when your company is like very young. So we only had a couple pages on the website. We're competing against established players, even though it's like a relatively new field. There were legacy players in it. So having like VPs of finance come in, and when they look at your website, it's not just like one blog post. There's just a level of credibility and authority that comes with more. You want people to go to your blog and just see a volume of content. You want them to see that you are putting out ideas over and over and over again, even if they don't read all of them. That is valuable. And your young startup needs eyeballs. You need more people to come in and see the work that you're doing. And that is a lot easier when you are constantly shipping things. You always have something to promote. And I know, and we talk about this a lot. I talk about it on this podcast. There's plenty of other podcasts. There's plenty of other articles talking about it right now. But there is obviously a repurposing like renaissance going on right now. And I believe in that wholeheartedly. But having new things to go out the door, especially if you're not just constantly like, okay, I have this one great article. How do I make it into 1,000 things? Just building up that initial library, I think, is really important. And so the other caveat here about the like more as a strategy, if your ICP is underserved, like ours was, you have an opportunity to really make a name for yourself and for your brand quickly. And to be honest, it's probably not all that common right now to have an underserved ICP. There's content about everything under the sun. So you might be thinking like, oh, well, I'm in, such and such software market. Like there's already so many players. Like I don't have the luxury of an underserved ICP, but like you need to dig deeper about your audience. And so for us, we weren't just writing finance content, but we were writing finance content for early and growth stage startups, specifically for us in B2B SaaS. And the truth is like there were websites like Investopedia, Corporate Finance Institute, I don't know, insert accounting magazine here. There are plenty of websites talking about corporate finance, traditional finance for the enterprise. But you're talking about teams that have they have a whole team just for board meetings, or they have 20-person accounting team on going on. We were selling to companies that had one head of finance for the whole company. And sometimes like in the early days, we were marketing to like founders who had to figure out finance on their own. And so like they had to do one person and maybe a couple, like an outsourced bookkeeper. They had to handle their board meetings. They had to handle analysis and financial model creation and like all of this with no resources. And so when we speak to that audience, like it was super underserved. Like you couldn't look up how to build a financial or like how to do a board deck and find like many articles for such small teams. These are really like assuming you have big enterprise problems. So all that being said, I am walking it back a little bit. I will admit that more is part of a strategy. I will not say more is a strategy, even though that's the title of the podcast. But I want to talk about what like just this broad concept means for your content strategy as a whole. I'm bringing it full circle. First thing first, I'm talking about the quantity versus quality debate. And I'm not arguing which one is right. But the truth is that quantity means absolutely nothing without quality. So I think the debate is kind of tired and it doesn't make sense, is that these two things go together. So the truth is that if the act of creating more won't do anything for you if what you're creating isn't good. Having people say that you're everywhere is great, as long as them seeing that you're everywhere is actually like resonating with them. And if they were telling you that it probably did resonate because the content is good. Which brings us to our next point, which is that good is like incredibly subjective. So I would say try not to be so romantic about your content. Perfectionism will absolutely kill you, and it'll just keep you from publishing anything at all. And so then the quantity versus quality debate doesn't matter because you're really not getting anything out the door. So if you had to pick one, if you're insistent that one of those is better than the other and you're free to say that, they go together, you got to publish something. So something is better than nothing. To me, I think the North Star should be that if you took that piece of content, you handed it directly to one person in your ICP, in your target audience, and they read it or they listen to it or they see it, will they think it's useful or helpful? The answer is yes. Great. Even if it's not the most like highest production quality, most perfect piece of content on the planet, as long as that's your North Star, I think you're going to do pretty well. If you're cranking out content just to crank out content, it's like 101 beginner stuff for an ICP that you know is very advanced. You could make 1,000 101 pieces and no one in your audience that matters will really connect to it. And so, focus on that North Star and then up the quality or up the quantity and also keep going for the quality as well. And the third thing I want to mention, I think that we'll wrap it up here, is that this idea of like more can be kind of an illusion. This push for more, just like the idea of like creating good content, more is subjective and it's relative to your market. It's relative to expectations of your audience. It's relative to what your team looks like. It does not have to mean staying up till 3 a.m., having like an energy drink on one side, some like late night coffee on the other, and just like grinding your face into the dirt to get more out the door. It doesn't have to be an impossible task for a small team or like a scrappy startup team. And the way you do this is by focusing on something else we've talked about before. It's like foundational content, not one-off projects that kind of like sit in a corner and like collect dust on a shelf somewhere. Everything you create should feed into a bigger system. So as the library grows, so does your library of assets that you can draw from over and over and over again. So the insights from this blog post over here will feed into a similar topic over here down the line. This podcast about this topic. So like for us, like maybe it's a podcast about budgeting processes. Now, every time I write about budgeting or I talk about budgeting, I can refer back to the points in that article or in that podcast. And so as the creator, you might feel like you keep dipping into the same pool of ideas and it's going to get old and it's going to get stale for the audience. But the truth is that repetition is really good for your audience. You should have core points that you're always trying to get across. And if you have high quality inputs, saying the same things over and over again or saying them in different ways, it's not going to hurt you. It's going to help you. And also, most like 99% of people, even in your audience, will not see everything you post, every podcast episode, every video, every clip, every blog post. Like they're going to miss most things. And so even though you think that you're kind of dipping into the same well too much, I promise you your audience will not think that. So recycle, mix and match things that you're creating as much as possible. And I think if you do that, you're going to find that you're creating more quantity and you'll know that the quality remains there, even though you're not just cranking and cranking and cranking every day to create like 10 new assets. So mix and match, make sure that you are keeping yourself sane because that's important to everybody. But all that being said, I have to admit that in some cases, more really is critical to the strategy and can benefit your company. And so that's really all I have today. But please rate and review. Let me know what you think about this. I would love to hear from you. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Content Head Podcast. One thing before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts about today's topic. Send a note to contentheadshow@gmail.com and let me know what's on your mind. And if you liked the episode, be sure to follow Content Head wherever you listen to your podcast. I'll see you on the next one.